You know, folks, the whole world is talking about Bitcoin. Want to know why? Maybe it's because Bitcoin rose in value over 150% last year, and this is just the beginning. Bitcoin is online investing that anyone can do. Visit bitcoinuniversity.org today. Take a master class. Download the Book of Bitcoin and take your investment portfolio to the next level. Visit bitcoinuniversity.org and discover all that a Bitcoin can do for you. That's bitcoinuniversity.org, bitcoinuniversity.org.
Good morning. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, I know that there's now congestion pricing that's going to be imposed on many. I've had congestion pricing for some time living in New York. You walk down the streets are congested, and people are asking for money. Do you have an extra dollar? So I've had this pricing, as you go along. But it's
being discounted, though. Isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, it's being discounted.
See, the longer you wait, the cheaper it gets.
Anyway,
the governor's kicking it back in. Supposedly.
Yeah,
we'll see what happens.
I got a note from one of our listeners, loyal listeners, and he said, you spoke about character, and I want to believe, and this is a teacher, I want to believe that character still matters. I want to believe that when I go into a class, I want to get young people to think of who they are as people, that it's not just who wins the race, it's how you win the race, it's who you are when you run the race. But I don't know if that is the culture that we're living in today.
Rabbi, you're raising a very, very touchy issue. We just come out of a presidential election. And, as I watched President-elect Donald Trump sit with President Joe Biden, they exchange the niceties, and, the politics is tough, but now we're here and we can move forward. I wonder if that's all there is to it. Is winning everything and character and conduct secondary, or does it still matter? That's an important question that I think the American people are facing coming out of this particular election cycle.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I see this conflict. I see we as parents, we teach our kids what character is all about, what they should do. In houses of worship, we stress character, and yet you pick up the papers and you see people devoid of character. And many are successful. So young people look and say, well, you're teaching me that character is imperative. If I want to really, be successful, I have to be a person of character. And then look at these people. Look at the characters that we have out there who don't have the qualities you teach me. So we're living in it's a contradictory kind of spirit.
Is it really questioning what makes one successful? And when we see success being achieved by individuals who don't necessarily subscribe to character and conduct and accountability and integrity and all of those wonderful virtues, does it say, well, maybe it doesn't work? Maybe I should, go the other direction?
And by the way, this is something that's applicable to both sides. This is not a one-side issue.
Right.
We've gone through many periods with people who have been successful, who had, questionable aspects of their life. I still think we have to remain committed to teaching character. I think that's what we do want. We don't want to compromise the character, but it just seems in the political world, getting things done, no matter how you do it, that's going to be the story. That's going to be what defines you. Character is secondary, and yet our parents and we don't think that way.
Yeah, and it's both sides. I mean, it's not like it's one party or the other. It's both parties or all parties. We have to determine. Are there moral boundaries? Are there ethical boundaries? Are there boundaries for rhetoric? How we win the game. Because at the end of the day, I think the masses are the ones who are hurt most because they're left in confusion while the politicians sit down and have a steak dinner.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, those who are imposing sides, great fight, let's go have a meal together. The public is still left wondering, okay, whose side are you on, and do we continue the conflict for the next election cycle?
Look, I think you hold out. I think ultimately, if you committed to a position, you're strong about it, you advocate for it. Ultimately, when there are many, many people out there who are in the public arena who have good character, so I don't think we give up on it. On the contrary, I think we should demand it. We're going to be disappointed at times, but it should not lead us to abandoning that position. So it's still a primary, I think, requirement. We have a great guest on today, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, Park Avenue Synagogue, who wrote a book touching on many issues since October 7th last year for the Jewish people, but it has ramifications for all people. So we'll come back.
All right, so stay tuned for more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on Sunday morning on 77 WABC.
Where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, today we have on the air with us very accomplished rabbi, done many things, proud to be his friend, his colleague. You're a friend of his, and I'm talking about Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, who has written a book entitled For Such a Time as This on Being Jewish Today, and he's the spiritual leader of the Park Avenue Synagogue. He also is an officer with the New York Board of Rabbis, and I remember when he first arrived in New York, we sat together, and I said to myself, he is going to go places. This is a visionary. This is someone who really understands the depth of Jewish experience in so many ways, and he went to Park Avenue, and he's a wow. Whenever you talk to people there and people who are not there, who know often, they'll say, what a rabbi. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much
Absolutely.
for having me.
Welcome to the program.
And Reverend Bernard, a dear friend, and Rabbi Potasnik, a dear friend and leader of the Jewish community. It's great to be in dialogue.
All right. The book. Why did you write this particular book? It deals a lot with October 7th. We already have the year anniversary. Why'd you write it?
Look, I think October 7th is a day like D-Day, like December 7th and Pearl Harbor, that there's a before and there's an after. It was an inflection point in the history of Israel, the inflection point in American Jewish identity. I call it the awakening. That is the way I begin the book, that we woke up to a different reality that day. Of course, we knew anti-Semitism existed. Of course, we knew Israel was surrounded by those who seek its destruction. Of course, we knew that there were difficult questions about the connection to Israel between diaspora Jewry. But that day really changed us forever. And this book, both of you are pastors. As pastors, we give people the vocabulary to explain their life experiences, their sorrows and their joys. And this book is my attempt to explain what American Jewry and those who are curious about the American Jewish experience have been going through since October 7th.
Yeah, I want to start with the title of the book, of course. We know, Rabbi, that comes from the Hebrew Scriptures and the whole idea of Esther. So tell us about the title.
Yeah, the title, the biblical spine of the book, and the title is For Such a Time as This. And that comes from the biblical book of Esther, which is associated with the springtime festival of Purim when it's read. And the story tells a story about an ancient Jewish community in Persia that thought that the going was pretty good. They thought they were comfortable, and they were, and they had assimilated well into Persian life as Jewish Persians. And then, of course, Esther, whose Hebrew name means to hide, entered into the king's palace, and she ascended to the very heights of power. And she, too, had it very good until the wicked decree from Haman came down. And in chapter 4, verse 13 of the book of Esther, Esther's uncle, named Mordecai, reaches out to her by way of an emissary and says, don't think that you're going to escape this wicked decree, and who knows, perhaps you've attained to royal position for such a time as this. And as we know, the story continues that Esther rises up as a queen, as a woman, as a Jew, and the Jewish people are saved. And I think this is really a paradigm, a biblical precedent for what American Jewry has gone through since October 7th. That we thought the going was good, that everyone in America had hyphenated existence. There are Africans Americans, there's Asian Americans, there's evangelical Americans, there's Jewish Americans, and this is what makes America America. And maybe there's anti-Semitism in Europe. Maybe there have been thousands of years of anti-Semitism prior to this moment, but we believed, and I believe, frankly, that there was an American exceptionalism, that our story was different. And then October 7th came, and what really happened on October 7th is we were all called on for our Esther moment, that in the face of threat, in the face of trauma, the attacks, but of course, hours after the attacks, the Jewish community was thrust from victim to aggressor, right? We really saw this in American Jewish life, that we've all been called on to step up, as Esther was, to the needs of the hour. So the book is really asking everybody to examine the story of American Jewry, but really that everyone in their own lanes needs to say, how am I positioned for such a time as this to step up to the urgent needs of the moment?
That's why I like.
Well, that
Go ahead,
raises a question. Yeah, digging into the story, because at first Esther didn't realize that she was tied to what was about to happen. If it wasn't for Mordecai, making it clear that she should not think that she from the possibilities ahead of the people. How are you drawing parallel with that? Do you find that there were those present on October 7th who understood what Mordecai understood, and there were also the Esthers who really didn't get it right away?
Yeah, I think,
in terms of the threat to
first of
Israel.
all, I think it's a great question, because I think the experience of October 7th was felt differently by different, call it, subsections of American Jewry. I think there were some people who were shocked, who said, where did this come from? You're right, the going's good, and I had no idea that there was such hatred against the Jewish people. And then there were also those people, and maybe it's generational, but not entirely so, that sort of greeted the horrors of October 7th with an "I told you so." Right? You thought that you were the exception, but we knew that it was these last 70 years of comfort, of hyphenated existence in American Jewish life. That was just a temporary pause on the world's most ancient hatred. And I remember a young man coming into my office, young professional, saying, Rabbi, I thought all those stories that my parents told me about the Holocaust and the need for Israel as a place of refuge and anti-Semitism, I thought they were crazy. I said, you know what, Rabbi? Now I think I was the one who was crazy.
Rabbi Cosgrove,
So
yeah.
Do
you think that October 7th was also a defining moment in who our real allies were, that we expected support from some who were invisible, who weren't there, who were silent?
Yeah, I think there has been real soul-searching, Rabbi, on this front. And I talk about it in the book because when attacked on October 7th, and let's be clear, it wasn't just attacks against Israelis, wasn't just attacks against Jews, these were crimes against humanity that were perpetrated on October 7th. And at that moment, the Jewish community that has historically and presently invested in Black Jewish relations, Latino Jewish relations, historically aligned itself with progressive causes, found itself lonely and isolated, and we heard crickets at that moment that somehow all lives may matter, but somehow Jewish lives matter less. The denialism that went on, the moral equivocation that went on, and I think just to be very, very clear, the conversations that I'm part of in American Jewish leadership, the question of, is this a shields up moment or is this a bridge building moment? Because if we're building bridges with diverse communities, then of course they're important unto themselves, but where are our allies at the moment that we need them? And so a lot of soul searching since October 7th.
Yeah. And we did see allies. I mean, when you look at the Cardinal A.R. Bernard, there were a number of people and groups that reached out, but there were many who simply did not. And that's something that really shocked us because, as you said, we spent all this time in creating partnerships, in supporting one another, and yet at this moment of real despair, the people who should have been there, many of them were not there.
Yeah. Rabbi, you also, Rabbi Cosgrove, you talk about in the book that you notice that even though this has been a dark time for the nation of Israel and the Jewish people globally, that they was experiencing something profound and beautiful, and that is a deepening, abiding connection to the Jewish community, to their own culture and faith. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, some people call it October 8th Jews, some call it the surge. I have seen, and my colleagues have seen, by any metric, an engagement with Jewish life. I've been doing this for decades now, the likes of which I have never seen. People, in the pews, people advocating, people engaged with philanthropy, signing up for classes, going on solidarity missions to Israel, people who were debating whether or not their home would have a Jewish character, and they've decided to engage. I know this weekend there's been in some of the independent secular schools hundreds and hundreds of families attending Shabbat dinners who are proudly identifying as Jews in the secular sphere. I will say that in the book I make a distinction between Genesis Jews and Exodus Jews. And Genesis, as the chapter 12 of Genesis describes, is an identity that God calls on Abraham and Sarah to be a blessing. This is a positive assertion of identity. And then in the very first verses of Exodus, there is a new Pharaoh who arises who didn't know Joseph, who makes the Jews other, perhaps a fifth column, feared, oppressed, and as we know from the Exodus story, put into servitude and slavery. So that is an Exodus version of Jewish identity, which is by the negative, by the push of being othered. And the Genesis identity is a positive identity. And my contention is that eyes wide open, as we have to be, to the threats the Jewish people face, is the fact that we all woke up on October 7th and we were all Exodus Jews. We were all feeling othered and marginalized in ways small and big. To be a Jew was great on October 6th, and it's great today. And we need to retrieve and retain and sustain and nurture a Genesis positive expression of Jewish identity.
Rabbi, my son will say to me sometimes, Dad, if it weren't for the Holocaust, would you ever watch a movie? And you spend a lot of time talking about anti-Semitism. And I'm glad to hear you talk about that positive identification, because I do think if we don't stress that, many of our young people are going to say, if it's all about victimhood, why is it for me? Why should I be part of it? What do you say?
Yeah, look, there was a famous philosopher, Rabbi, that Emil Fackenheim, who talked about traditionally Jews count out 613 commandments, the things we're supposed to do, the do's and don'ts. And Fackenheim, in a post-Holocaust world, talked about the extra commandment, the 614th commandment, which is not to give Hitler a posthumous victory, as if to say that if we stop being Jewish, we'll start doing exactly what Hitler sought to do. Now that, for me, growing up, was a very positive thing. I grew up with Hebrew school teachers with numbers tattooed on their arm from the concentration camps. The Holocaust was very, very real in my Jewish formation and identity. But I tell you now, as a congregational rabbi, if I were to tell a 12-year-old before their bar and bat mitzvah that they need to be Jewish because of what Hitler tried to do, they'd look at me and ask me, what am I thinking? They to tell someone they need to be Jewish because of the hatred of others is not a compelling reason for a young person to be Jewish.
I have to ask you a question. I love the contrast you made between the Genesis Jews and the Exodus Jews. I'm going to reflect on this, of course, and I'll give you credit, Rabbi Cosgrove, from your book.
Don't wait for that, Rabbi.
I'm going to give him credit. Come on, I'm integrity here. But do you think that this marginalization that points back to the Exodus, the other, do you think that that's what has continued, that the Jewish people have been branded by that, even to this day, thousands of years later?
Look, it's always been there. You know, the outsider status has been there from the very beginning. You were once a stranger in a strange land. That's from the Bible all the way to the shores of America. That has been part and parcel to the Jewish identity. And I think in many ways it's been the strength and savior of our people that we retain identity, even knowing that we might be on the outskirts of community. So the idea of having a separate, sacred Jewish identity is not unto itself a bad thing, right? The question, though, is if it comes with a sting of somehow being diminished in the eyes of the majority, or at the receiving end of anti-Semitism. I make a distinction in the book, another chapter on anti-Semitism, that there is anti-Semitism that comes at the end of a fist, the violent, virulent, whether it's verbal or physical attacks against Jews throughout history. But then there's also a more genteel anti-Semitism, right? When Jews are disinvited from academic conferences, from film societies, from cultural festivals, when kids on campus aren't invited into progressive Jewish circles because as Jews, they somehow must, by extension, support the Jewish right to self-determination in our historic homeland. Or even, this past week when we saw the horrific attacks on the streets of Amsterdam, right? There's anti-Semitism, which you can name, but then when you see how the media has portrayed that they say, oh, these are just soccer fans being hoodlums, and boys will be boys, as opposed to what should happen, which is to call it out as anti-Semitism, plain and simple. And this moral equivocation isn't at the end of a fist, but it is a veneer of equivocation that sort of gives the green light to ancient hatreds to play out in our lives.
Especially when it was proof that this was Jew hunting, as they called it. They have, in the investigation, this was planned before a soccer match, and absolutely no justification. We'll be back with more conversation with Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. Stay tuned.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC and the all-new WABCRadio.com.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
And we are speaking with Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, author of a new book entitled For Such a Time as This on Being Jewish Today. And he, of course, is the rabbi of the Park Avenue Synagogue and officer of the New York Board of Rabbis, of credits that would take too long to mention. Rabbi, I want to commend you for something. I have gone on some of the Zoom calls listening to your sermons. And the number of people who follow you may not be members of the congregation, but you are their rabbi. What do you think of that when someone says, well, I don't belong there, but I consider him my rabbi? You know, there's a plus and minus there.
Yeah, look, someday I'm going to write a book, The Things They Didn't Teach Me in Rabbinical School, and this is one of them. Because this was not anything, Joe, that we planned for.
Right.
That when COVID came, we had a very passive live streaming, that it was there to, the grandmother who was in another state who wanted to watch. So we were wired for it, but we didn't publicize it. And then when COVID came down in 2020 and no one could enter their houses of worship, we were actually ahead of the curve, because we were already able to live stream our services at that moment. And it really became an anchor for people who were seeking spiritual fulfillment in a time that they couldn't enter their synagogues. And then it just took off. And the talents of the cantors and the wisdom of the rabbis and the obviously not a small AV crew who works every week to make it all happen, we created a sort of a virtual synagogue at the time that on the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there can be hundreds of thousands of people who are engaged, and on any given Sabbath, tens of thousands of people. And the synagogue has been able to connect people to tradition from far-flung places around the world. And there is, there's no intention. I'm a synagogue Jew. I grew up in a synagogue. I've always been connected to synagogue life. I don't want to be the Walmart of a synagogue. We're able to message and provide educational resources, but the vision is one where all ships rise, because the local rabbi is the one who's going to officiate at your child's wedding, or God forbid, be present for illness or a funeral, or and proud as I am, there's nothing like entering a synagogue and being greeted by someone who knows you when you're there and misses you when you're not.
Right.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the community, that gives identity with a specific faith, tradition, and values, etc. I think that is what brings a sense of stability to our society when we have faith communities like that. They're ongoing, and regardless of young people saying, I don't want that, it's irrelevant, it's something that they come back to when they understand family and the role of faith and community like that.
Rev, when I first started as a rabbi, there were people, and I'm sure you've had this as well, they would walk by the congregation and they would say, that's my synagogue. He's my rabbi. And they would never come in. And they would never join. And we thought of developing a membership where if you walked by, you were going to, be charged for that. At least you'll feel a stronger connection with you. But, I like the Zoom because I think many people would not. But by the other side of that, there are people who are not joining congregations, so to speak.
Yeah, but before you go to the Zoom, Rabbi, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I do new members class sometimes when I can to welcome new members into our faith community. And when I have people in the audience telling me, I've been attending church for the last 10 years and I finally decided to join. How do we respond to that, gentlemen? People not wanting to make a commitment, but understanding what it brings, the value of it, and being a part of the community, and then they decide, okay, I'm going to make that commitment. But this is a reality that we deal with.
Yeah.
Look, I think the riches and truths of our respective traditions are ancient and they're eternal, period. I also think that it's incumbent upon contemporary religious leadership to communicate those truths in the technology and of contemporary society. So if everyone is accessing their information by way of their handheld devices, their iPads, and otherwise, I think we need to recognize that we live in an age, it's called, the fancy word for it is disintermediation, right? There's no more blockbuster video. There's no more, the traditional ways. Now we live in a Netflix moment. And I think synagogues and churches, houses of worship, have a critical countercultural place to play. I can make an argument that they are more, not less important in a time of iPhones and otherwise. That said, I think there needs to be a partnership between the new and the old to attract the minds and hearts of a seeking generation.
Yeah, and technology makes that. I will tell you, when we started live streaming, it was 3 years before COVID. So when COVID came, we were already prepared to do just that. And many of the houses of worship of different faiths were just totally unprepared. They didn't realize the importance of keeping connected and using technology. Are there some in your faith tradition who shunned technology until they were forced to embrace it, as we do now?
Absolutely. And Rabbi Potasnik can probably speak about this more broadly, but the use of technology on the Sabbath is totally untraditional. So this is a moment of competing values on the Sabbath, on the festivals, in Orthodox and many conservative communities. They will not use electronic devices and otherwise, which is a decision I, of course, respect. And given my roots, it's one I identify with. For me, being a contemporary religious leader is always a balancing act between adherence to tradition and translating it into the contemporary context. So, that's a balancing act. I'm sure each one of us in our respective lanes walks every day.
Someone once asked a rabbi, do all of your people walk to the synagogue? And his answer was, yes, everyone walks to the synagogue. Some from the house, some from the car, but they all walk to the synagogue. Rabbi, talk about, here you are in New York, and we've developed, thankfully, a very strong interfaith network. Rev and I often talk about when we first started, before you became a rabbi. Interfaith was not, something that resonated with a number of people. No, don't do that because you're going to dilute your values, your traditions. And yet we found it was very positive because, I was telling the Rev, in order to have interfaith, you have to have interfaith. You have to know who you are in order to better understand who someone else is. Talk about the interfaith experience.
Yeah, it's critically important always, and especially in a place like New York City, where so much of what we do, whether it's advocacy, whether it's deeds of seeking justice and kindness, or just understanding the human dignity of another, we live in a symphony of American life. And I think that important as it is to affirm the tenets of our respective faiths, we have to remember that every human being is created equally in the infinite dignity of God. So, last night, my colleague at the Church of Heavenly Rest, just my neighborhood church, was installed as a new rector, and it was very, very important for me to be present and to let them in a classic neighborly fashion. So it's happening on a local level. It's happening in getting our teams together to work on social justice projects. Rabbi Potasnik and Reverend Bernard, the two of you are leaders in the New York community in terms of getting people around the table for common cause. And of course, in times of crisis, you and I, Rabbi Potasnik, have stood there shoulder to shoulder, not just on issues of Jewish concern, but when we see another faith community in need of a friend, friends show up for friends. And so you need to establish those friendships in the good times. So God forbid, when there's a bad time, we're there for each other.
I remember your installation, Rabbi, and I was sitting next to Cardinal Egan, right?
That's right. Cardinal Egan turned to my father-in-law and said, behind every successful son-in-law is a shocked father-in-law. Great line.
Yeah. But he was so proud to be there. I remember talking with him, and I don't know how many installations he's been to, but he really was very impressed with your presentation. But the fact that he, as a cardinal, could come to a rabbinical ceremony such as this meant a lot to him, and made a statement in New York how much we need each other. Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, Rev, you see why I told you he was the second best rabbi in America today?
Yeah, I understand clearly.
Yeah. You have a quote in the book, Rabbi, from Maya Angelou about courage is the most important of all virtues, because without it, you can't practice any of the other virtues.
Right.
You are a person of commitment. You are a person of courage, and a model of real leadership where you can serve your community, but you can serve the larger community. So thank you so much for being with us. We look forward to many more conversations with you, but you're an inspiring leader.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure having you on the program. Thank you. And stay tuned for more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on 77 WABC. We'll be right back.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC and the all-new WABCRadio.com.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, we often speak of a free pulpit where you're free to express yourself, without any fear of being imposition of thoughts by others. But that's become more challenging in many places. But Rabbi Cosgrove is someone, when you listen to him, and I've heard many of his sermons, he speaks his mind. You don't have to agree with him every time, but he's able to express it. And people respect him for the fact that he is his own person.
You and I, during the break, were talking about the pulpit. And when you said that, it just stirred so many different images in my mind. But especially the religious pulpit, the power of the religious pulpit. And it lies in the ability to shape beliefs, influence behavior, mobilize communities, and as well as what we do in terms of guiding, giving moral guidance and spirituality to people. But it's a very powerful platform because people trust the voice coming from that pulpit and allowing it to shape their thinking, to stir their emotions and their motivations. It's a very, very powerful platform. And we should be concerned about integrity and its use, et cetera. You and I talk about that all the time. But I just think about how powerful that platform is and our responsibility that goes with it. Rabbi?
I remember hearing years ago from rabbis and also other faith leaders, different traditions, that in their particular congregation, they would have to submit a copy of the sermon Friday or Thursday before presentation. And there were those who refused. There were those who said, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't need approval. When you hired me to be the rabbi of the congregation, to serve this congregation, to speak with independence and integrity and intelligence and all those qualities. You can't interfere with that.
Right.
But that was, that wasn't years ago. I don't hear the stories today. But when you get up and you speak and you say, especially in this society now where we're so, polarized, You say something that doesn't resonate with some people, and they're ready to walk. You know, all the other good that you did is forgotten. But the fact that you would support this particular, issue, individual, forget it. I'm out of here.
Well, especially in the politically polarized and socially polarized and divided times that we've experienced over the last several decades, not just currently, but over the last several decades, I have had to counsel pastors who've lost hundreds and in one case, 1,000 congregants over divides on social issues or political identity. It has really, invaded the church in ways that many spiritual leaders never imagined that they would have to address situations like this. And yet it's very real, and it's part of the social consciousness that you and I have to deal with even now.
And if you don't express a particular point of view, what are you doing? You're talking about subjects that are very neutral, right? That you're afraid to touch certain areas because you don't want to antagonize. So you'll talk about the art of happiness. It's hard to offend anybody when you talk about the art of happiness, but you won't talk about, the political climate, and you certainly won't talk about a particular candidate. And that gets you into trouble in a host of ways in terms of, you're a 501c3, you can't endorse, but it is you got to navigate, through this labyrinth, and it's not easy. But I always find you can be there 99 out of 100 times that the minute you say something that someone doesn't like, the 99 are forgotten.
It's true. It's really, really true. We're judged by that moment and not our whole body of work, right? And
right.
That's a tendency. But let me ask you a question. Just how obligated do you feel to have to weigh in on social issues?
I think, it varies congregation to congregation, but I think people, and you and I have discussed this as well, I think people want to hear, looking at, especially today, looking at what's happening, what does my tradition say about this issue, about this time? As a rabbi would say, for such a time as this, being Jewish today, what does my religion expect of me? So I don't think you can avoid it, but you got to present in a way that you don't intentionally antagonize people, that you look to bring people together. But it is not easy.
And it includes navigating the different expressions of Jewish identity, because it's not a common Jewish identity. A Jewish community is not monolithic. So how do you choose, what specific Jewish identity you're speaking from?
One of the things I find that people respect, authenticity. Most people, even those who disagree with you, admire you if you're being honest and authentic. You're not being plastic. You're not just adapting to a particular way because it's popular, but you're being principled. And I think ultimately that is the way to go. But you do in a way where you recognize the right of others to have a view that counts. You don't devalue someone who differs with you. And I think we have to present that model of behavior. So,
and it goes beyond. And I want to push it beyond that, because even with us in Christianity, we're in crisis. When we think about Elliot Cosgrove, Rabbi Cosgrove's book title for such a time as this, on being Jewish today, we're talking about identity. What does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to be a Jew in America? Because it's contextual. And we're asking that same question now, Rabbi, as Christians. What does it mean to be a Christian in America? Because of the political identities, the social issues that are defining, what does it mean? How do you answer? What does it mean to be Jewish in America?
It's, first of all, Jewish identity means you're proud of being a Jew. You don't hide your identity. Jewish identity means that you express Judaism in a positive way. We had a conference this past week, the Board of Rabbis. We met with leaders of Hillel, the organizations on college campuses. And one of the things they stressed is, with all that's going on the campus, we will continue to emphasize the need for Jewish joy, the need for Jewish pride. We want people to be able to walk feeling it's good to be a Jew. It's not painful only to be a Jew. It is painful these days, but pain is not the only dimension that we have in our religion. So I think positive Judaism is the way that we have to express ourselves, no matter what denomination. And by the way, people are hybrids. They're a little of this, a little of that. Nobody fits into this, this neat category all the time. But I still think positive wins.
And is that okay that we have these nuances of our identity within our specific faith tradition?
Yeah, because life is complicated. Right? There's no simple answer, and sometimes you're a little of this, a little of that. But I do think that we have to be the voice of the prophet, the voice that challenges, the voice that confronts. But at the same time, we have to be that loving Jew, the Abraham who was a source of blessing, and you look at all of the patriarchs and all that they brought to community, to their own people. That has to win over everything else.
Yeah, no, it's true. Good program. Good guest today. I think you did a great job. Of course, his book, For Such a Time as This, and it's available on Amazon and your local booksellers as well. We didn't give him a chance to talk about where we can get the book, but it's generally available. Excellent. Great conversation. All right. And until next time, same place. I almost said it, Rabbi, same channel, right?
Yeah. Well,
the Rev and the Rabbi.
And the same producer, Ava Anderson, who's really, makes this all possible. We are grateful to her.
She makes us look good. Right here on 77 WABC. Until next time, God bless.